Love or hate Dragon Ball Super, you gotta admit that the Ultra Instinct Aura is looking pretty damn good, you know. And furthermore, it's the perfect excuse to use particular and mess around with effects. So in this tutorial, we're gonna be covering the Ultra Instinct Aura from Dragon Ball Super. So hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Now essentially this effect is or can be broken in three parts. So the first layer will be the steam, the blue steam. The second layer will be the sort of like these organic blobs looking thingies. I don't know how to call them, so I'll just name them blobs. And the third layer will be these nice streaks, which are the simplest to do. So let's get started. And I will be using Trapcode Particular for this, which, if you're new to After Effects, Trapcode Particular is a third-party plugin that you have to purchase from Trapcode. So if you want to follow along, you need this plugin. With that being said, let's get started, and I'll create a new composition, and I'll just use Full HD. Maybe increase the duration to 350 frames, hit OK, and here I have a picture with Goku with his awesome looking back. Although I kinda hate that they're making everyone a little thinner. In Dragon Ball Z they used to be a lot more buff, but that's another story. You can grab whatever image you want from Google, just type in Goku PNG, and this will ensure that the image you're using is coming with transparency. So you can see this grid in the back here, that means that there's transparency. And also if I enable it here, you can see that there's no background. Alright, so you need this, just keep that in mind. Let's rename this composition to main. Alright, so the first thing I'll do is grab this Goku layer, and let's Control Shift C, and this will create a pre-composition, and make sure this is set to move all attributes. I'll name this to Goku, right? And I'll go ahead and duplicate this, so Control D, and hide my original layer, or actually just leave this as it is. And the second layer, so the duplicated layer, I will press Control Shift C again and pre-compose this again, so this will be Goku Edge. Alright, and I will step inside this new comp, and here for this Goku layer I'm gonna go ahead and add a effect, Generate Fill, and I'll make this white. Now I can duplicate this layer, so Control D, and the first layer I will set the track matte to be Luma inverted matte. Alright, so it's gonna look at the layer on top of it, and it's gonna sort of mask itself with itself, and this will make sense in a second. So for the second layer, if I add effect, let's go to blur and sharpen and use a box blur and increase the blur radius, you can see now that we are sort of getting this nice edge around Goku, and we will be using this, basically this layer, to drive our the creation of our particles. Alright, so let's increase the iterations to 3 and mess around with this value here a bit. Alright, so something like this should be fine. Let's also go to our first Goku layer and add effect, noise and grain, fractural noise, and you can see now that this has a lot more detail to the edge, which is good because we have more variation. We will have more variation in our particles. Set the complexity here to 2 and increase the scale from the transform tab. So just increase the scale of this noise, and also I want this noise to be animating, and you can do this by changing the evolution settings. And also I can just Alt and left click this stopwatch here and add a simple expression which will be time multiplied by 150, and this will automate the animation. Right, so now we will use this layer to drive our the creation of our particles. So back in our main layer, I'm gonna go ahead and make a new solid, so that's Control Y, and the color doesn't matter. Alright, and this will be my steam. Go to effects and let's add our Trapcode particular effect. So now I'm actually gonna hide this Goku edge layer because we don't need to see this, and press F4 and make sure this is a 3D layer. Alright, and now back in our Steam, I can go to emitter, and let's see, for emitter type I want to use layer, and inside the layer emitter options I can use layer and set the layer to be Goku edge. Alright, and if I solo this layer, and let's scroll a few frames, you can see that there are some particles appearing, and if I increase the particles per second here, alright, you can kind of see that it's using the layer we just created to generate particles. I'm gonna set the layer RGB usage to none. This will make sure that all of our particles have the same size and everything is nice and uniform. Let's maybe decrease the velocity, so I don't want the spread to be as strong. Alright, so getting somewhere, and let's go to physics, and let's make these particles fly upwards, and I'll set the gravity to maybe -35. Alright, so now our particles are flying upwards. I might even want to use some turbulence, so inside physics and air tab I can go to turbulence field and maybe increase the effect position. And this will just sort of add a bit of curls in our movement of the particles, give it an overall more organic feel, right, which is what we want. Let's maybe go ahead and go into our particle settings here, and let's set the color over life. So set color over life, and now I can go to my color over life, and for my gradient I'm gonna use this preset, this nice white to black gradient preset, and the black color I'm gonna make this to be a darkish very saturated blue. And for my first color, the white color, I'm gonna set this to be a very bright pale sort of like the cyan color. Alright, something like this, and I'm gonna set the blend mode to add. Alright, maybe I can make the particles size a little smaller, so to use 3, and maybe increase the particles even more so it's nice and bright. Alright, so something like this will be fine. If I unsolo the Steam layer and press F4, I can set this to be the layer to be on add, and this will make sure it's blending nice with the Goku image that we are using. Let's maybe go ahead and add some effects to this layer as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and add an effect, box blur, and maybe set this to 7, and make sure you increase the iterations here, maybe 3. Alright, so this sort of softens up our effect, and make sure repeat edge pixels is on. So this will soften out our aura and just make it appear more like steam, which is maybe the how it's supposed to look. So this is the reference I'm using. Let's go back here, and let's maybe try to bring back some of the detail, or try to tighten up this aura by using a vector blur, and I'll set the amount here to maybe 7. So this sort of tightens it up a bit. You can kind of see here what it does. And now I can go ahead and do some color correcting, and if I solo this layer and turn on transparency, you can see that there's transparent. The particles are actually, they have transparency, and this will be hard to color correct. So in order to fix this, I can go ahead and add a channel solid composite, and I'll set the color to black. Alright, so now this sort of like this whole layer comes with a black background, which is a lot easier than to color correct. So now if I add a color correction curves, I can go ahead and increase the contrast here, and you can kind of see that it's a lot easier this way. If I turn off solid composite and just disable, you can see that the curves just sort of mess up. So with the solid composite, now it works as it should. So hopefully that makes sense, and let's unsolo this. Alright, so it's actually looking pretty good. Final thing will be to add a stylized glow to this and increase the radius here. Just make sure it's nice and soft. I can also mess around with the colors. If I go back in my particular, and you can mess around with these two colors. So maybe if this is too blue, I can change the second color to more of a a lighter blue. Right, so you can see now that this might be closer. You can also do all kinds of effects, like you can have the regular Super Saiyan aura, for example, if you just use other colors here. So maybe, I don't know, more like orange. So pretty cool. Let's undo that, and that's for you to play around with. Right, so this will be our Steam. Let's actually make a small preview here to see if the animation is good. You can see that this loads pretty slow because there's a lot of particles, probably like 200,000. And let's see. So maybe it's a little too fast. You can go ahead and decrease some of this gravity, so -25 maybe. And also let's maybe decrease the spread to 15. It doesn't do really anything. Well, I mean, this should be fine for now. Let's maybe there's a little too much detail in this, and you can easily fix this by increasing the blur radius. So if I use a radius of 9, this will get rid of some of that detail. Now this depends on what kind of look you're going for, really. So you can also add more detail if you decrease the radius. So hopefully, you know, yeah, you can get a nice balance. And like I said, it depends on what you're going for. Alright, so this will be our Steam. Let's go ahead and take care of our blobs, and let's make a new layer. So Control Y. Let's go to particular, and let's rename this to blobs, and solo this. And again, I'll use emitter, and emitter type will be layer. Layer emitter. I'm gonna use my Goku edge. Layer RGB usage none. Let's increase the particles, decrease the velocity, so the spread. Alright, so essentially what we had before, and also I want to use some gravity to this, so maybe -35 again, just so they're flying upwards. Alright, this should be fine. Now if I go in my aux system and set the emit to continuously, you can kind of see what this does. So essentially what aux system does is, let's turn this off. So it essentially creates particles along the trails of the particles that are already generating. So these particles that are already on the screen are sort of the lead particles for new particles to be created. So hopefully that makes sense. So if I turn this to continuously and increase the particles per second here, I just want to make sure that there's no gap in these streaks. So make sure you increase the particles per second here, and let's maybe, we don't need as many particles, so maybe 400 should be alright. Let's go back in our aux system here and maybe increase the size to 10. And let's see, I want the size over life. I want to use a preset gradient, so I'm gonna use this pen tool, and now I can reshape this graph here, and you can see what this does in the preview. And I want to create sort of like a shape that resembles the blobs, and this should be fine. Let's maybe unsolo this and see how they look next to Goku. Maybe you can increase the size to 12, make them a little thicker. So you can make them thicker by increasing the size, and also if you increase the life you can make them longer. So maybe increase the life to 0.7. Let's take a look here. Should be fine. Maybe 0.6. Alright, this should be fine. And maybe decrease the feather, so I want them to be sharp. So if I set this to the feather to 0, now you can see that they have sharper edges. Alright, let's see, maybe there are a little too many. Well, we can always go back and change it. Let's see what's next here. Let's solo the blobs. All right, you can also see that originally they're also heavily, or not heavily, but just a bit distorted, and we can easily do that if I add a new effect to this layer, distort triple N displace, and I'll set the size to maybe 8, so you can kind of see what this does. So if I decrease the amount, maybe increase the size a bit, maybe 10, increase the amount, you can kind of see we're getting sort of the same deformation that they have originally. Should be fine. I also want to animate the evolution for this, just so they have a little more, this will give it a more organic look. So again, I'm gonna add an expression to this, time multiplied by 150. Right, should be fine. Let's unsolo this. Let's turn off the steam, and I want the particles to be sort of more spread out and wrap around Goku, and we can do this by using a distort effect. Let's see, mesh warp. Alright, so mesh warp. Let's set the rows and columns to 3 and 3. We don't need such a high grid. And I can now grab these points, and you can kind of see how this reshapes our particles, which is pretty easy and nice. And just try to, whoops, just try to, oh come on, make them wrap around Goku. You can grab the handles here, and you know, this is not necessary, but just looks a bit nicer, or maybe closer to the original effect from the anime. Alright, looks good. What's next? Let's actually add, let's take care of our colors now. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a fractural noise to this layer. Set the complexity to 2, and I'm just gonna use this to give it a nice gradient of colors to work with. So now if I add a color effect, let's go to tritone, and let's use that pinkish violet that's from the anime. Alright, so I'm going sort of for this tone here. This should be fine. Also set this to screen, alright, just so it blends in nicely with Goku. And I'm gonna go ahead and let's rename this to blobs flat. Alright, and I'll show you in a minute what I mean by this. So if I duplicate this layer, Control D, I'll name this blobs edges. So I want a new layer that sort of will create, you can see that there's a highlight around the blobs here, and I want to recreate that sort of edge effect. And let's see, so I'm gonna disable, I'm actually gonna delete these 2 layers, and I'm gonna go ahead and use a stylize and find edges, and this find edges I'm gonna set to invert, and you can see that this creates that edge effect that I was talking about. And now I can go ahead and add again a fractural noise, and this fractural noise I'm gonna set to multiply because I want it to blend with the edges. And I'm using again this fractural noise to sort of break out the pattern and result in more colors to work with and just have a more interesting and cooler effect. So complexity to 2. We don't need as much complexity, and maybe offset this a bit, just so it's not the same as the fractal that we're using for our flat colors. And again, I can go ahead now and add a tritone and set this to more of a brighter, what's this, pink? I guess, right? So hit OK there, and maybe even add a stylized glow, and maybe spread the radius a bit. Decrease the threshold here and set this layer to add, and now when everything comes together it looks like a mess. And let's maybe add the steam back, and all we have to do now basically is just select our layer, press T for opacity and drop the opacity down, and you can see now that it's getting closer to what we want. And I'll also decrease the opacity for our second layer. Alright, and this is pretty close, I would say. Now you can either increase or decrease the particles here, so maybe for our edges I don't want as many particles, just so it doesn't get too messy. So if I use 250, now edges will be only to like half of our blobs, and we still get the original blobs below the edges. Alright, looking pretty good. And now our final layer will be the, let's see, make a new layer, and this will be our streaks. Alright, and this is probably the easiest one to do. Let's solo this and go ahead again and add a come on, where it is, particular. Alright, so in the emitter settings, I actually want to use as a layer, I want to use the original Goku layer. So this guy, not the Goku edge one. So I need to make sure this is a 3D layer. Alright, let's unsolo this back and go to our streaks here. Alright, so we want to use a layer. In layer emitter, I'm gonna use the first layer, the Goku layer. RGB usage, none. And alright, decrease the velocity again. So the spread, let's add some gravity to these as well, so -35. And essentially here we're gonna do the same thing with aux system and turn this on, emit continuously, and you can already see it kind of looks like what we are going for. These streaks here, maybe we don't need as many particles, so let's drop this to 50. Alright, and I actually want to hide the original particles that are driving the other particles, so I'm gonna set the size for our particles to 0. And let's go to our aux system and maybe make this a little longer. So if you increase the duration of your aux particles, this will lead to longer streaks. Decrease the feather, or maybe actually let's use a feather of 50. So I want the spheres to be a little softer. Maybe increase the particles per second to 50, so 15. So there's not as much gap in between the particles. Looking fine. Let's see, maybe even less particles, maybe 35. Alright, and we need to shape these streaks, so we can do this if you go to aux system for size over life. You can use a preset here, you can use this preset. Alright, so now they're getting smaller as they age, and it's creating this nice shape. Let's go ahead and add a glow to this. Alright, and maybe add a second layer of glow, and this guy I'm gonna spread the radius. Alright, and again, to color these I'm gonna use a channel, let's see, solid composite, set this to black, so this will give it the black background. And now I can add a tritone. I can set the color to be a nice blue, and this should be fine, I think. If I unsolo this, just give it a second here. Oh, actually, wait, why isn't this working? Oh yeah, I have to set this to add. Alright, so now everything's coming together, and maybe there's too many damn blobs here. Let's use 350. Still think maybe actually just decrease the blobs edges to 35 and maybe 18. Just, you don't want these blobs to be the actual aura. They kind of look stupid by themselves. But that's it. That's pretty much it. This is the effect. So hopefully you've enjoyed this tutorial. Maybe you learned something new. And now here's the best part. You can go into your Goku original Goku composition, and you can actually use whatever image you want. So if you ever wonder what Krillin would look like with with Ultra Instinct, let's see this guy. Let's save image. Alright, and let's drop this here, and if I replace this, alright, so now if I go back, right, Ultra Instinct Krillin, very easy, very easy. Alright, so that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.